call on Senate President John Cullerton to start following the orders of a corrupt mayor.
That's right.
And for him to lead the state in doing the right thing.
That's right.
He has a job to do as Senate President that he frankly is not doing.
Right.
Scandal after scandal has besieged our schools under the control of this corrupt mayor and his hand-picked school board members.
Yeah.
We have 6.5 million people in the state who cannot afford their rent.
Yeah.
Referenda have indicated that people in this city want an elected representative school board and they want rent control. But what has Senate President John Cullerton done? He's blocked efforts to move existing bills forward. Now, if the House can pass a bill for an elected school board, why can't the Senate do it?
I'm here as a leader with the Virginia Burns Hope Center and a proud member of the Lift the Ban Coalition. In this city that we love, Chicago, unfortunately, we have always been highlighted as one of the most segregated cities in the country. And when we think of that, we tend to think of this as a cultural thing. But it's not just that. The reality is that this is economic as well. It manifests in every sector, from our access to quality health care, to unjust disparity in educational resources, to our ability to find truly affordable housing. There is a serious problem going on, and I think we can all see what it is. There are those who have used their financial and political capital to continue to turn Chicago into a city divided. A third of Chicago's households cannot find affordable housing. A minimum wage worker would have to work 106 hours a week to afford average city rent. That doesn't make sense, does it? I love the neighborhood I've lived and worked in for many years, affectionately known as Bronzeville. Back in 2003, when a venture capital / property management company, we'll just call it what it is, came into the neighborhood, doubled everybody's rents. My rent in particular went from $550 to $1,100
No.
They wiped out an entire almost 56-unit complex of people from staying in the area that they love.
Now, it's a travesty that we're subjected to elected officials who refuse to do the will of the people, who completely disregard the needs and the wishes of Illinois residents. The voters have spoken on this issue. Last March, 77% of the voters said they wanted rent control in Chicago. 85% of the voters in 2016 said they wanted what? Elected school board. Elected school board.
Elected school board.
Do we have it?
No.
I've seen firsthand our schools being destroyed and thousands of my neighbors being displaced by the policies of the administrations in City Hall and Springfield. I have seen all students losing access to programs, courses, and basic services in neighborhood public schools, and students with special needs being denied the programs they are entitled to. I've seen my neighbors, many of whom have lived in Uptown for decades, being displaced because they can't afford the rent.
We need an elected school board. We need to tell Rahm Emanuel we don't need hand-picked rich folks that don't identify with us. Because they don't understand what we go through every day. When I had to deal with a kid that has depression, and it took me 6 months to find help for him, and I see him crying. That is not fair. That is not fair. And like me, there are many mothers out there that are going through the same thing. We don't need that anymore. We need people that understand our communities, that actually identify with our problems or our issues. We need Lift the Ban. We need to push people in the Springfield. Fullerton needs to pass that bill, needs to help us pass the bill. Our families are suffering, and we're not going to take it anymore. Enough is enough.
getting pushed out of our communities. Our schools are being closed. They're being destabilized. Our young people are being hurt in the classroom. We're being pushed out of our homes. 10,000 Latino families pushed out of Pilsen. 20,000 Latino families pushed out of Logan Square. You got 250,000 black people pushed out of this city. Why?
No, that ain't right.
Because Ron, Connaughton, they want to turn this city into a white, rich city. Yeah. We worked here. We've done our due. But what protections do we get? Can our children feel safe going to their classroom and believing they're going to get a quality education?
No.
Do our seniors feel safe in their home?
No.
On a fixed income, their rent going up every single year? Across the street from Jackson Park, where the Presidential Center is going, Section 8 residents being given notice that in 30 days their rent is going to go up $300.
That ain't right.
I'm here to speak about the idea of what safety looks like in schools for us lately. I go to Kenwood Academy, where there's about 2,000 kids and one social worker. So we talk about the idea of what it's like to not feel like we can feel safer in our own schools. The idea that I have a lot of kids, a lot of friends who go to these schools and are depressed, and the students don't care, the boards don't care about us. We're forced to just work and work and work, and we act like animals in these schools because they don't give us enough mental health reform to treat us and make us feel right in these schools, instead of having safety by ensuring that the teachers are funded, that we have enough art programs to make kids feel like they have an escape instead of always having to work 24/7. We have police in our schools armed. Nobody's gonna feel safe in a school where you have police constantly armed. Nobody's listening to our voices. Nobody's listening to the parents of these students. Nobody's listening to the board. Nobody cares about the teachers. Nobody's funding these teachers who work day and day and spend their own money to make sure that we have a right to learn every single day in school. Nobody cares that these students are literally committing suicide due to so much pressure and are not getting the same amount of mental health care that we should be getting. A lot of these kids go through so many trauma, whether you're coming from the south side or the west side of Chicago, living in dangerous environments and having to constantly go through trauma 24/7, and coming to these schools and not being cared about at these schools where we're supposed to be learning, we're supposed to be felt like we are cared about and feel safe, and we're being ignored. We have Rahm Emanuel spending $95 million to fund a cop academy, but you have schools being shut down. You have mental health clinics being shut down, but Rahm can invest $95 million into the corrupted CPD.
That ain't right.
Rahm can fix CTA train stations, but yet you have schools being shut down, mental health clinics being shut down. A lot of these places, a lot of these kids not even being able to go to school, or they're forced to go to charter schools where you have 30 kids in one classroom with one teacher, where it's not a proper learning environment for us to be in. And it's time for students to finally be listened to. It's time for these parents of these students to finally be listened to. It's time for the board to listen to the teachers who care and invest their own money. I have a teacher who literally goes out of her budget to make sure we have the supplies we need every day in school, because they're not being funded. We have 2,000 kids, one actual trained social worker, and just teachers who act as counselors to make us feel safe. If you have a panic attack in school, you're just told to go back to class like it was nothing. And that's not a safe environment for us.
For 4 years in a row, Illinois is the only state in this country that has continued to lose population. The majority of those people are who? Low income, working class, black families. Households are being uprooted. Children ripped out of schools. People forced to find jobs in other states because they cannot afford to live here.
As we stand here today in front of City Hall demanding justice for our students in our schools, as we stand here right now, the mayor of this city is running around trying to win re-election on a claim about the success of the public schools in the city. His claim is that he has delivered a successful public school system, and he's got $100,000 worth of ads to prove it. What is the real legacy of mayoral control been? What is the real legacy? I'll tell you what it's been. The first part of that legacy is that the mayor appointed a banker, David Vitale, to head the school board, who engineered $600 million worth of handovers from the public into the coffers of big banks. The legacy of elected control was Barbara Byrd Bennett, who was brought in from Detroit and Cleveland to sell school closings. Mass 50 schools closed, predominantly in black and brown neighborhoods in this city, and she was brought in to use her credibility to sell that policy. That was that legacy. The legacy was Deborah Quazzo, the person who ran a private equity fund, an investment fund that sold investment opportunities to privatize public school services. She herself benefited while our school services got privatized. That was the legacy. And now we see new scandals erupting. Scandals in which the mayor's office and the leadership of the schools turned a blind eye while students were being assaulted and hurt in school. While the people who've actually delivered the improvements in schools, the teachers, the PSRPs, the clinicians, and yes, the community members and parents get none of the credit but did all the work. So he's claiming the benefit of our work. That's been the legacy of an unelected school board. That's been the legacy of mayoral control. But really what it is that's the legacy of corporate control. Because as long as the corporations and the people who profit off those corporations are running things, we are never allowed to have a democratic vote. We cannot have a democratic voice because if the people get to decide ourselves, we won't allow a small group who don't even send their kids to our schools to make millions off our schools. We wouldn't allow for it. We would end it. We would vote them out. We'd use our voices. And that can't be allowed because ultimately corporate control is incompatible with democracy. And that's not just at the mayor's level. That's at the state level. You heard Joanza talk about Browner. And that's at the federal level, where you see Trump, who lost an election, is now also in control and trying to use his control to stack a Supreme Court and to get rid of people's rights to have unions. And so we have to say that what people control would mean in our schools would be actually supporting our students and their families. It would actually be trying to let people have a way they can afford to live in the neighborhoods that make this city great. You know, I'm a teacher. I represent 20,000 people who work in the schools. What do we want? We want good conditions in our classrooms, but we also need good conditions in the neighborhoods where people live. People have to be able to afford to live in the city. Why should real estate developers be able to charge unaffordable rents, drive people out, change the face of the city, when a simple rule change that would allow for rent control, a democratic decision process that would let people afford to live in our neighborhoods, we can put that through. They won't let us because they are allergic to real democracy. So what we're about, we've been asking for an elected school board for 10 years, for decades. Okay, now is the time to have it. So I call out Rahm Emanuel. I say, you cannot run behind your record in the schools by being against everything that people want. Your administration, your legacy is one of scandal, it's one of failure. Ours is for calling for truth, for justice, and for the people's voice to ring out, and that's what we're going to get. Thank you.